So you play out what is success, but then once you've figured out what success is, do your processes and do your strategies line up with that, right? I can say that I want to go this direction, but if everything everybody is doing for me in those processes goes in the opposing direction, guess where you're going?
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions. I'm your host, Jeff Barnes. This is the Angel Investors Network podcast. And today we're speaking with Jason Greer, and he and I just had a nice conversation about business process improvement and Lean Six Sigma and how to leverage those tools and those ideas to increase the value of your business, but also how to use them and how to identify red flags and potential problems when investing in or acquiring businesses. So definitely worth a listen. And of course, if you're a business owner, by all means, stay all the way on until the very end where you can learn a little bit more about Jason, how he helps businesses get ready for a profitable exit. Take care.
Welcome to Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions, the place to learn how to fund, scale, exit, and massively profit as an angel investor or entrepreneur. Brought to you by the Angel Investors Network. And now, here's your host, Jeff Barnes.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions. I'm your host, Jeff Barnes. And I'm joined today with Jason Greer. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you to talk about how people can start positioning their businesses and designing their businesses for maximum value on the exit side of their career. So before we get started, why don't you go ahead and tell people a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. So my career started in IT. I started back in the Y2K days and started as an intern chasing Y2K issues through insurance systems. So did that for a few years and moved over into more of an actuarial world where we started chasing tens of pennies through massive models. And if you can imagine the amount of data that flows through even just a single calculation for one life insurance policy, it's pretty amazing. And so I started to get into the data world there. And then it didn't take long. We had a consultant come in to help us around continuous improvement. Got introduced to Lean and Six Sigma. And before you know it, I was pretty hooked. And so went and got my Six Sigma black belt, really dove into the Lean side, and started chasing process improvement. If you've ever seen those rooms with 1,000 sticky notes where they're trying to map out the process, that's kind of what I was pretty passionate about for a number of years. So I did that for a while, moved over to a large consulting firm and started traveling the country for them and started to integrate both of those concepts of data as well as process together. So one week I'd be in a cheese factory, the next I'd be in a hospital, the next I'd be in a school district. They'd give us a few million rows of data and say, figure out how to tell our story. And so from there, that's really the impetus for creating the business design studio that we have now, was all the learnings that we got from recognizing how do you tell the story of a business and how do you know how to design a business.
Very cool. Well, we definitely have some corollaries there in our lives because I remember the Y2K bug, and a lot of our listeners will probably remember that, the folks that are on the business ownership side and the investing side. And at the time, I was in high school in '99, and I worked in an auto shop, and I remember people coming in and filling up several 50-gallon drums of gasoline in preparation for the apocalypse, right?
Yes.
And I just have to ask, I never dove much into it afterwards, but in hindsight, did we have to go through all of that hysteria to make sure that we didn't reset computers back to 1900 and have everything shut down? Or was that just hype?
I don't think it was hype. I think so. It's interesting. If I'm completely honest, I filled the bathtub full of water, and I was one of the guys on the front line. In my little department. Now, don't get me wrong. We were working in COBOL. Some of this code written back in the '60s, right? So pretty legacy. But in our little department, we had 12,000 changes to make. So it doesn't take long for you to start doing the math and being like, man, if just one person doesn't move this forward, what's going to happen?
Right.
And thankfully, we watched the ball drop and everything was fine. But I honestly think it was due to the hard work of a lot of people. I started in '98 and they were pretty far along by then. So they had been chasing this problem for 4 or 5 years, preparing for it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people, it didn't become mainstream until close to 99, really, for a lot of
Mhm.
folks. And you think about that in the world, we know about Moore's Law and we know about how everything changes rapidly when it comes to technology innovation, computer chips, manufacturing, all of that stuff. And like you're saying, Cobalt, Pascal, these languages written a long, long time ago. And I'd imagine the creators of those are like, yeah, well, that's 40, 50 years down the road. We're not really too worried about what's going to happen then. Let's just figure out how to make this thing work today. So
Yeah.
one, they probably never even thought about it. And two, if they did, they probably thought in a few decades, they will have replaced this thing because technology will just accelerate dramatically. Right. And
Very
so
much
it
so.
is kind of funny
Yep.
to see how that happens.
Yep.
And so then the next thing that you're talking about is going in the insurance world. So I actually, my only actual job once I got out of the Navy was working in an insurance business and eventually working with those types of people who were saying, hey, we know how to help you structure your data, which I always thought was interesting. They say, well, you're going to use machine learning and AI. And this is over a decade ago to structure your data. Now we're talking about data that was on, pen and paper that was then converted into a PDF. And he talked about actuarial tables and all these different things. And I wasn't doing just like property and casualty and life insurance. We were doing equipment breakdown and business interruption insurance, things like that too. So there was a lot of data science that went into that. And just like you, I was at the time I was getting my MBA and I learned all about Lean Six Sigma and reading the book The Goal, which I think every
Yeah.
business owner needs to read. I think it's required reading for any business owner.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally agree.
and got really into it. I never decided to go that route of the Six Sigma, the full black belt. So tell us a little bit about that process and what that means for people that have never heard those terms.
Yeah. So if you think about a process and what we are trying to understand about it, is one of the ways you can do that is to attack it from the concept of what is wasteful within your company. So the analogy I give sometimes is imagine you go to the coffee shop and you're watching the barista across the counter from you, and you say, "I want a cup of coffee," and they walk to one end, they go get the cup, and they walk to the other end, and they go get the coffee, and they walk to the back of the shop, and they get the milk, and they, you know. Now, my question is, what did you buy there? Now, what you bought was all of those movements, right? You bought all of those steps to get to where we are today, and it all rolls up into the cost of that one cup of coffee. But in reality, you had no interest other than a great cup of coffee. And so it's really helping from a lean and Six Sigma world. You see it a lot in manufacturing, but can we understand our processes through the eyes of our customer? And how do we cut out things that the customer finds no value in, even though us as an engineer or a manager thinks it's important? The people that matter the most, that customer, don't see the importance of it.
I love that. So I want to give you a couple of examples, and I think we can just like laugh about these. So um, there's this car a long time ago called the Dodge Diplomat. It actually was manufactured specifically at the time for police vehicles, police cruisers. And this is a boat of a car. This thing was enormous. And I remember having to cut my teeth and learning how to be an auto mechanic on that car. And one of the first things we found was absolutely ridiculous, that you had to unbolt the engine so that you could change the oil. Right? You had to literally disassemble the engine from the frame, lift it up so you can get the oil filter and change the oil. And, all of a sudden talk about adding costs for unnecessary steps because of a design flaw, right? But one that's more recent, and when I think about Lean Six Sigma, anything when it comes to just in time production and making sure that things are working in the most efficient manner. Right now, as we're recording this, Los Angeles is burning to the ground, right? We're at the tail end of the fires right now. And I'm originally from Los Angeles, so I have vested interest there. My grandmother's house is still there that my aunt and my cousin live in. And I'm watching this and just it's mind blowing to me what's happening for a lot of reasons, right? The fact that Los Angeles, one of the biggest cities in the world, doesn't have the infrastructure to help put this out. And we're not talking about a massive forest that's not been contained. We're talking about a massive city. And secondly, okay, let's just say there's all these failure points that have happened that anybody probably could have spent a lot of time figuring this out and like, hey, worst case scenario, what would happen and how do we fix it, right? That's part of what we do when we talk about engineering processes properly. But then there's this issue of, okay, well, we have states like Nevada and Oregon, neighboring states are going to send in their vehicles to go help. Like we will send the vehicles in, which, if there's no water, I don't know how much help they're going to be, but let's just say they would need to get there. Did you know that they have to all go through Sacramento to get smog inspections? Now, again, I'm reading this in reports, so I may be wrong. So if anybody wants to correct me, that's totally fine. But we're reading reports from the firefighters in Oregon. They're saying, hey, we're here in Sacramento waiting for our smog inspections, but because emission standards are different in California than they are in Oregon, they're not passing. So now we have to go through this whole issue to get them fixed so that they can then send them onto the fire. And one of the whole things that I think about when it comes to inefficiency in general, and this is what Lean Six Sigma, business process improvement is all about, is how to engineer out the inefficiencies, which would then lower the cost and speed up the desired results, right? In this case, saving people's lives and property and just getting the equipment where it needs to go, right? And I mean, we could talk for years on how to improve government efficiency, but in businesses, it's vital, right? Because if you are a business owner, the last thing you want is for your employees, your technology, your systems, your processes to be adding unnecessary costs because that erodes your profits, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So when it comes to all of these pieces and parts, and I'd love to just kind of nerd out with you on some of these things. What do you find are some of the biggest challenges that business owners face when it comes to inefficient practices inside their business?
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, when you talk to businesses, they're almost a product of their past environments. And by that I mean, we go through this world where we have fire after fire after fire that we're facing now. Not
Right.
changing
Like
the
perfect
paradigm here,
analogy.
but one customer screaming, or inventories down, or whatever may happen to you in your business. And what we do is we build these band-aids and we just continually put them on top of each other to the point where we don't recognize the true value that we intended to create, right? And so a lot of times in the case where I'm talking to a business owner, I'll ask the question, and it's kind of a silly question, honestly, but imagine you wanted to go lay on the beach and run your business from there. Um, and every week you get three numbers dropped off to you, and you have to run everything from that. Can you figure out how to run your business? And would your business run without you, if all you had was the number of, or the guidance of three numbers? Um, and so what it does is it forces companies to understand again what success truly is. Because when you're living in the day to day of chasing all the fires and putting out the fires and managing all of the things that pop up, you forget what success is, and you have missed the opportunity to run in the right direction. And so we'll play that game, right? So you play out what is success, but then once you've figured out what success is, do your processes and do your strategies line up with that, right? I can say that I want to go this direction, but if everything everybody is doing for me in those processes goes in the opposing direction, guess where you're going? And
Right.
so it's a matter of helping organizations kind of align to what is success, what is your strategy, do your processes align to that, and how do we move there?
Before continuing, please subscribe and share this video to help us reach more people and stay notified of our latest releases. Now, let's continue watching and learning.
So I'm guessing that you are a proponent of or a fan of John Doerr and Measure What Matters, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of them out there just like that. Yes.
Yeah. And I love that book and I love the way he talks about it. And you're saying some of the same things, which is there's a goal out here and you need to engineer everything to achieve that goal. So when you're working with these clients to engineer those goals, are you working with them to figure out what the goal should be? Or did they come to you and say, hey, I already know what the goal is. What are the activities I should be focusing on to achieve my goal?
Yeah, it's interesting. And if we talk later about data, this may come up as well. But when I was consulting, we would go into companies, and I mentioned a lot of different industries that we were in, and I started to recognize after a couple of years that some of those projects we were wildly successful, and some were just kind of mediocre. And so I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how do we do this better. And what I came up with was it all depended on who met me at the door on day one. And so if it was the CEO that met me at the door, we would have 4 hours of conversation. I would hear about where they want to go, what success looked like. We would understand what we were chasing. But if it was the IT guy that showed up at the door and said, here's the keys to the database, good luck, we were shooting in the dark. We didn't know what we were chasing. And I think the same thing goes for your business. If you are uh, not taking the intentionality to understand where you want to go and then leading others to recognize that same thing, you will not be successful in how you get there.
I think that's really important because there's a couple things you just mentioned. And I'd imagine 98, 99% of all business owners fall into this trap at some point, which is I have a goal in mind. I want to achieve that goal. And they underestimate how hard it's going to be to get there, especially if you're a startup, right? When you're a startup, it may look like you may think it's just out in the distance, like, oh, that's a nice little mountain range we might have to cross, no big deal. And before you know it, you're at the base of the Himalayas trying to scale this thing without all the right equipment and team, right? And they underestimate the challenge. And as a result, you end up putting out all the fires. It's like, oh, this problem came up, this problem came up, this problem came up. And before you know it, you're fixing all these problems, thinking as you're going towards that goal, but your roadmap is veered. And now you're going in a completely different direction. And yet the CEO still wants to go this route, but it's like the inmates run to the asylum, right? They're like, no, let's just fix this, fix this, fix this. And all of a sudden you have processes and systems in place that maybe were created with the best of intention, but they're not leading in the right direction.
Right.
So I think that's really important. What you just said is that the CEO or the person in charge of the business owner, CEO, managing director, whatever that might be, needs to set the vision, set the goals first, and then everything needs to be engineered around that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. And go back to your fire example, right? I can guarantee you the people that created the smog laws that you're talking about, now I'm unfamiliar, but I can guarantee you that when they developed those, there were none of these issues going on.
Right.
We had no idea that we were going to face this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we create vacuums within our company where people are trying to make the best choice that they can make, but they may not see the larger strategy, they may not see the larger vision, and they don't take into account all of the different ways in which this could break, right? So it's that de-risking of your business in some ways, but it's helping in setting a larger vision so that people can understand, okay, well, that's where I'm pointing, and that's how we're going to get there.
Well, there's de-risking certain pieces, but then there's over-engineering as well, right? And I find that a lot more frequently because, like, I'll give you an example. I was in the Navy, I was on a submarine, and we're trying to get our boat back up and running after an 18-month period of being in the shipyards, and we need to get back out to sea. And because the submarine sitting in the shipyard is just a massive expense, and it's not doing what's designed to do. So we have to get it all fixed up. So we're literally at the point of, okay, we need to bring the steam down the headers and get everything going. And all of a sudden, and I was responsible. I wrote over 500 different work packages for fixing a lot of the things in the steam system. I was in charge of the quality assurance program, and I could not tell you how many hairs I ripped out of my head dealing with the bureaucracy and the politics and the red tape and okay, well, this could possibly go wrong. And mind you, we're in a shipyard. The nuclear power plant is shut down. There's no water. There's no steam. There's no nothing. We have to over-engineer everything. So we're writing all these work packages as if we're working on a live system, but we weren't. And it was because, well, that's how I was trained to do it. We have to do it this way. And I was the guy in my department. We were the ones actually doing the work. We're like, listen, there's no risks here whatsoever, but okay, we'll do it this way. So it added massive man hours. All right. Then we get to the point, okay, we need to finally bring the steam down header. The plant is warming up, everything's going, and all of a sudden one of these senior guys says, hey, that thing right there is installed backwards. Who did that? We're like, well, the shipyard did that. Well, we need to fix it. Okay, well, we got to shut everything down. We got to do this. And like, go buy the book, because that's what you trained us to do, right? We don't have time for that. We don't have any time for that. I want you to shut that valve, take that thing out, swap it, and fix it. It was like, that was the day I realized I was not staying in the Navy. I'm like, you know how many times we said the same stinking thing when the system was shut down, and yet now, because it's an emergency and because you guys want it done a different way, we'll do it that way. Fine, okay. Even though now we actually are putting people at risk because of this. And it was one of those situations like, do as I say, not as I do. And when you finally realize there's a goal, you're not process driven, you're results oriented. Now it really starts to make sense why we're doing things the way we're doing, right? So you don't want to over engineer something just because you can. You really just want to get the results. And you want to get the results in the most efficient, effective manner possible without putting people in harm's way, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think are some of the most valuable activities that a business owner can be looking at when it comes time to get their business ready for the market, ready to sell?
Yeah, we could probably talk about this question for hours. But if we bring it down to a soundbite and as a part of just a general conversation, I think what can be most successful for a business owner is to figure out how to work themselves out of the business. And so, we talked about those fires. They're getting the emails, they're getting your requests, the concerns everywhere they go. Start to document those things. Start to recognize what is going on there. Start to chase root causes. What is causing this? Is there something the way we work? Is there something as a part of our external vendors that are causing problems? But start to really chase the root causes of what's going on. If you will attack those root causes, you will then resolve some of the bigger issues. I like to tell people it's kind of like this ball of string, and it's all wound up together, right? And people look at it from all the different directions. You can stare at it from 5 directions, and everybody's going to communicate about it differently. It's chaos. But if you'll just take the time to start pulling it apart and recognizing that big ball of string was actually 6 or 8 or 10 smaller strings individually, start to lay them out one by one, you can start to attack them. And so recognizing that a big problem is usually made up of a bunch of small problems, and pulling those apart and recognizing how to get there.
So how do you suggest business owners go about that, right? Because, I know even for myself, I'm like, okay, I see everything that's happening inside the business. I know what's happening, what we need to get done. But most people I found, this was one of those, realizations with maturity. Most people don't want to be a business owner. Most people don't even really care what the job is they have. They just want a job, and they want to be able to do their job well. And then they want to take a paycheck and go home with it every day. So they're not even thinking about the business once they clock out. Versus the CEO, the founder, the owner, they're thinking about it 24/7, 365. And so I have found that I can't just say something on a team meeting and expect people to understand it. And I can't even tell them what the problem is, because even though they might be part of the problem, they don't understand the problem. So how do you help business owners kind of understand that process too, so that, again, they're not the ones fixing all the problems either, because that's also putting them back in the crosshairs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually working with a client right now, a similar situation, and we're actually designing into their process what we're calling a root cause analysis toolbox. We have a war room. We've filled it full of sticky notes, and we are one by one recognizing every time we hear the word fire, every time we hear the word special project, right? And the list goes on. We put those on the board and we talk about those things together. And problem solving is a muscle, and you have to work it and you have to build it. And so build it inside your company, build it inside of the people that you rely on, and then build accountability measures, right? Put it on the wall and say, how are we doing? How is this moving forward? What is that going to do for our business once we resolve it, right? Because I can guarantee a lot of those things, even though they feel like fires, like it's the first time we've seen them, most likely you've seen it 5 or 10 times in different flavors. And so if we can start to recognize those root causes, a lot of those fires just start to disappear.
Absolutely. And the biggest challenge I've seen when it comes to almost any business is communication, right? And the CEO has an idea or vision or strategy in mind, and they might try and communicate it to, the troops, and then they try and run with it. But they're like, okay, well, I don't really know what to do with this, and then they run into problems, and then you're like, oh, we'll have to communicate this back up the chain of command. So I love that what you're talking about is like building that root cause analysis back into the process. So it's like, hey, if something goes wrong, I can only imagine what this looks like. But if something goes wrong, there's got to be a way to let everybody else know, hey, we're running into a problem, right?
Right. Take it back to your submarine example. What would have happened if they would have found that reversed part 6 months before, right? It would have not been an issue
Non-issue.
at all. And so
Yep.
recognizing when to fix problems and how to find defects. And I mean, there's so much to go into there, but giving people permission to be curious is a very valuable asset to your organization.
Absolutely. I wish it was easier to teach.
Yes.
Teaching the curiosity is that's a different topic altogether, right?
It is.
So let's flip the script and let's talk about investors. So we help companies or, other companies buy smaller businesses, and we help investors invest in and buy companies as well. So what are some of the red flags that an investor or somebody looking to acquire a business would be looking at and would say, hey, this is a red flag. We need to deal with this.
Yeah. About 6 months ago, I was looking at purchasing a business, and it was a manufacturing firm. We had asked for their inventory for the organization. And the broker was like, "Oh, that's going to be hard. We'll see what we can do." Right. And just, it was pretty fascinating. 8 days later, I receive a PDF with handwritten inventory lists on notebook paper, right? So didn't take long for me to recognize this is a red flag. And the red flag was, that person didn't really understand how their business worked. Everything was here. Everything was in that person's head. And how was I going to buy a business if I couldn't get that stuff out, right? They had no system, they had no process. And so I think looking for the opportunities where you can find where the owner has to be key for it to be successful, to me, that's a huge red flag. When we look at the culture, does it align well? So does the strategy book that they handed you or that you get in the investment guide, does it match with what's actually happening in the processes, right? If you go talk to people, do they understand that strategy and does it align with what they're doing? Other things that I would suggest is if we move it to more of a data conversation, if you think about data is sitting in a lot of different places. It sits in your finance system, maybe it sits in the CRM or ERP or MRP, all these different places it could be sitting that manage this business. Are we capable of not only asking simple questions, but what I would say is complex questions? By that, I mean, a simple question is, how many orders did we do? Now, I can ask this question and I can get it by date. I can get it probably by customer. It's all in one system. It's simple to ask that query. But can I ask complex questions, right? How many orders came through that were written by this salesperson that were returned to the organization 3 months later? Now, that's one example, but think about it from the organization you're getting ready to invest or purchase. Ask them complex questions of their business and see if they can come up with an answer. See if you end up with handwritten notes or see if they're even capable of doing that, right? That will be a key indicator of how much they've integrated their data and how much of a data strategy that they have. If we think about it from a process perspective, what I always tell people is look for piles of widgets. And that may be on a manufacturing floor. The goal is probably where I learned this a long time ago. But processes that don't run efficiently have backups, right? They have bottlenecks that are accumulating all of the widgets. And those piles of widgets are actually a huge detriment to the way your efficiency runs, right? Now, it may be a manufacturing floor, but it could be a spreadsheet sitting on so and so's desk, right? And so chasing that back and understanding how process and how orders flow through an organization can be a huge indicator of how successful they're going to be or how efficient they are.
And I'm going to tie that back into something you said earlier, which is the CEO should not be, or the seller, the business owner should not be the one giving you all the answers, right?
Right.
I mean, that's a clear indication that no one else on the team knows what's happening. And to your point, the way to create value in a business is create a system that runs without you, that generates cash and cash flow on a regular basis and is ideally profitable without the business owner being involved in everything. I heard a quote from Robert Kiyosaki a long, long time ago, which was, you don't have a business until you can leave for over a month and it is operating better when you come back than it did before you left. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really key way to look at it for a lot of these people that are interested in investing. We're buying businesses right now. We actually, it's ironic that you mentioned some of these things because we're talking with a seller and we have access to their e-commerce system. And we're looking at, okay, their e-commerce system shows $31 million in sales. But then you go over to their accounting system and it doesn't match up. Like, well, what's going on here? And the CEO's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Go talk to the accountant and say, okay, these are issues. These are challenges that we have to overcome. Now, as the buyer or the investor, sometimes that can work out in your favor because it means, hey, that reduces the multiple because now we have to go fix this thing after we buy it, right? So there are some good things that come out of it. But like you were saying, as the investor or the purchase acquiring the business, if you don't know these things and you don't know what to look for, you could be buying a bag of goods, right? Buying the manufacturing business where everything's just written down on a notepad by a guy that's going to get mad at you the first day after he finds out the boss sold the business and he didn't make any money and he quits, right? Like that's not where you want to be.
Well, yeah, and think about it from an investor's perspective. You're probably not invested in one single company as well, right? So then you start to multiply those issues where even the company you're investing in has multiple sources of truth. And then you multiply it by the number of companies you own. Well, if you want to get to a point where you're starting to calculate what profitability is across your organizations that you're invested in, or whatever those things that you're wanting to measure, the world gets really complex. And so understanding how they're structured and if they even have thought through a data strategy. And I know that sounds like a really intimidating word, but it doesn't have to be. It's just a matter of perspective of understanding the data that I need out of the system. Is it being captured and can I get to it? And just having those conversations and understanding that.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end on because if you can't find the data that underlies what's actually happening in your business, how do you actually know what's going on? So, Jason, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Why don't you tell folks how they can learn a little bit more about you and find you online?
Yeah, you can always find me on LinkedIn, but you can also find me through peelbusinessdesign.com. Our goal is to design organizations. And so love the opportunity to chat with whoever would stop by.
Awesome. Wonderful. We'll make sure we put all that information in the show notes. And as always, if you've enjoyed this podcast, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this with your friends. So you've been listening to the Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions podcast from Angel Investors Network. Thanks so much for being here. Jason, thank you.
Thank you very much.